All right, so we are diving into A Court of Wings and Ruin this week by Sarah J. Maas. And, I think the big question with this one right off the bat is it worth it?
Yeah, that's a thing,
I mean,
right?
it's a massive book.
It's a big one.
So,
You really got to be sure.
yeah, it's worth my time. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think based on everything we've been looking at, from like Goodreads reviews, the author's own website, and, professional book review, I think it really depends on what you're looking for as a reader.
Okay.
Because if you want something that's, kind of light and breezy, this is not it. But if you're into like epic fantasy and, really intense romance, you might call it romantasy, actually.
Romantasy.
That's a genre now.
Yes. I'm not sure how I feel about that yet, but okay.
Tell me more.
It's a very specific reader.
Okay, so one thing that I am seeing a lot is that people have pretty strong feelings about the writing style.
Yeah.
Some Goodreads reviewers are calling it purple prose on steroids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a strong statement. I mean, I was counting,
Mm-hmm.
and in this book, she uses the word mate 202 times.
202.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a lot.
That's got to get old fast.
It definitely can. And I think for some readers, that's a total deal breaker. Like that writing style is just not for them. But I do think that over-the-top style is part of the appeal for her, core audience. It's like those guilty pleasure reads, the kind that just suck you in with like tons of emotion and a really fast-paced plot. So
I see that. Okay. I'm seeing that.
yeah.
But I got to be honest, I'm still a little bit skeptical, especially when it comes to Feyre, the main character.
Yeah.
I feel like I saw a lot of back and forth on whether she was, this like amazing, powerful character, or if she was a little too powerful, almost like a Mary Sue kind of.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one because especially in fantasy, that whole chosen one trope can be so over.
Yeah, for sure.
But with Feyre, I think it's interesting because her whole journey, from being human to becoming a fairy is kind of a power fantasy in itself. She starts out super vulnerable and kind of naive, and then through all these trials and tribulations, she becomes like this unstoppable force. It's like Maas took that whole chosen one thing and just turned it up to 11.
Yeah.
It's super over the top, but I think for a lot of readers, that's what makes it so fun.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But then what about Rhysand?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I get it. He's got this huge fandom.
Oh, yeah.
But some of that, mate behavior seems a little possessive, even a little problematic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely some problematic aspects to that whole mate bond thing. It's inherently possessive, and Maas doesn't really shy away from that. So, whether that's a deal breaker for you, it really just depends on your tolerance level.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. It's make me think of some other like fantasy romance books that I read, like Throne of Glass,
Oh, yeah.
which is also by Maas, right?
By Maas, yeah.
Where like the power dynamics are pretty intense in those relationships.
Totally. And I think that's a really important point about Maas's writing in general. Like, she's not afraid to explore those darker, more morally ambiguous areas. And, it's either something you love or you hate.
Right.
But to be fair, you see similar dynamics in other popular series, too. Like, A Shadow and Bone comes to mind,
Oh, interesting.
where the romantic relationships are all tangled up in power struggles and, yeah, potentially unhealthy attachments.
Right.
The key is just to go in knowing what to expect.
Yeah, for sure. Eyes wide open, right?
Exactly, eyes wide open. And speaking of eyes wide open, let's talk about the steam factor in this book.
Oh, yeah.
Because some reviewers definitely felt like it was a little over the top.
Yeah, that was something that came up a lot of the reviews I was reading. Is it really necessary to have that much detail?
It's a good question. And honestly, I think it really comes down to personal preference.
Okay.
Ma's writing style in general is very like heightened and sensual. So the sex scenes are no exception. I think you either appreciate that kind of like full-blown passion and intensity or you find it distracting. It's like comparing a delicate watercolor to a like super vibrant oil painting.
Okay.
They both have their merits, but they appeal to totally different tastes.
So you're saying if I'm not a huge fan of like graphic romance scenes, maybe this isn't the book for me.
It might not be your cup of tea, but I will say even with those steamy scenes, the romance in A Court of Wings and Ruin isn't just about physical attraction.
Okay.
Like, it's also about these really grand, sweeping gestures of love and sacrifice and devotion. It's got that classic fairy tale romance feel, but with a very adult twist.
Okay. I'm intrigued, but I'm still kind of hung up on the pacing thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like some people mentioned that the first half of the book is really slow, and then the climax feels super rushed.
Yeah, that's a fair criticism. The pacing isn't perfect. Maas definitely takes her time setting the stage, weaving in all this intricate world building and character development. But for those who stick with it, I think the payoff is pretty huge. Okay.
The second half is nonstop action betrayals, shocking twists. It's like a roller coaster that slowly climbs to the top and then just plummets you down at like 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Got it. So it's like delayed gratification, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And you see that kind of pacing in other fantasy series too, like The Cruel Prince comes to mind.
Oh, interesting.
You have to be patient with the first book, but then once the action ramps up, it's like impossible to put down.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So last thing I want to talk about is the world building, because, we're talking about a whole universe of fairies and magic here.
Oh yeah, this is where Maas really shines, I think.
Okay.
The world building in A Court of Wings and Ruin is definitely one of its biggest strengths. She expands on the worlds from the first two books and introduces all these new fairy courts, each with its own, culture and customs and political intrigue. It's so well developed.
Right.
It really is like discovering a whole new continent.
That's awesome. But how does it compare to other fantasy worlds out there? Like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones? That's a tough comparison.
Right.
I mean, A Court of Wings and Ruin doesn't have quite the same scale and depth as Tolkien or Martin.
Yeah.
But it holds its own in terms of originality and imagination.
Yeah.
Maas takes all these classic fairy lore elements and blends them with her own unique mythology, so it feels both familiar and new at the same time.
Okay, I like that. So it's not just a rehashing of old ideas.
No, not at all. It's like she took all these ancient legends and gave them a modern twist.
That's cool. So, okay, you've sold me on a lot of things, but I got to ask, is there anything you didn't like about the book?
Oh, of course. No book is perfect, and A Court of Wings and Ruin definitely has its flaws.
Yeah.
We already talked about the writing style and the pacing issues. And honestly, even though the world building is amazing, it can be a little overwhelming at times. Like, Maas throws a lot of information at you, which can be hard to keep track of.
Right, it's a lot to process.
It really is. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose, exhilarating but potentially messy.
Okay, so it's not all sunshine and roses.
Definitely not. But honestly, I think that's what makes it so interesting. It's a book that sparks debate, it challenges your expectations, and it stays with you long after you've finished reading.
Okay, I'm ready for my verdict.
All right, let's hear it.
But before I make my final decision, I need you to be totally honest with me. Is this book really worth the hype? Should I carve out time in my already crazy busy reading schedule for 700 pages of fairy drama?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question, and unfortunately the answer isn't a simple yes or no.
Come on, you can't leave me hanging. Give me something to work with here.
Okay, here's the bottom line. A Court of Wings and Ruin is a polarizing book. Some people will absolutely adore it. They'll devour every page with feverish intensity.
Okay.
Others will find it overwrought, problematic, and not worth their time.
So how do I know which camp I fall into?
That's where you come in. You have to ask yourself, what do I value in a book?
Okay.
If you prioritize beautiful prose and subtle character development and a slow burn romance, then this might not be the best fit. But if you crave action-packed fantasy, a fiercely independent heroine, a swoon-worthy romance, and you're not afraid of a little stylistic excess, then A Court of Wings and Ruin could be your next literary obsession.
Okay, that's actually really helpful. So it's all about knowing your reading preferences and going in with the right expectations.
Exactly, and that's what we're here for, to give you the information and insights you need to make an informed decision.
Well, mission accomplished. I think I've got enough to chew on now.
Great, then let's wrap this up with one final thought.
Okay, so no easy answers, but I appreciate the honesty. I think I'm leaning towards giving it a shot. What's the worst that could happen? I DNF it and move on to something else.
Exactly. There's no shame in that. And hey, you might just discover your next book boyfriend in the process. Rhysand does have that effect on people.
We'll see about that. But before we wrap up, can you give me one last nugget of wisdom? Something to really help me decide if A Court of Wings and Ruin deserves a spot on my TBR pile.
Okay, how about this? Imagine a world where magic is real and danger lurks around every corner, but love can still blossom even in the darkest of times. Does that world excite you? Does it make you want to dive in and experience it for yourself?
Yeah.
If so, then A Court of Wings and Ruin might just be the escape you've been searching for.
Ooh. I liked it. It's like you're inviting me on an adventure.
It is an adventure in a way, a journey into a world of fairy lore and forbidden romance and epic battles. Whether you conquer the mountain or turn back halfway, the choice is yours.
Well said. I think you've officially given me enough food for thought time to make a decision and either order that book or move on to the next shiny object.
That's the beauty of being a reader, isn't it? The endless possibilities, the world's waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. And thanks to your expert guidance, I feel much more equipped to navigate those choices.
My pleasure. Happy reading.
Thanks for joining me.
And to all of you listening out there, thanks for tuning in to this deep dive on A Court of Wings and Ruin. We'll be back next week with a brand new book and a whole new set of opinions. So until then, happy reading, everyone.